This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
This is Military Matters. In our last episode, we brought you part 1 of our Future War series on North Korea. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode first, I'd highly encourage you to go back and listen to that one, then return and start up this episode, part 2. In this episode, Jack Murphy and retired Special Forces Colonel Dave Maxwell discuss the modern state of North Korea, the rocky relationship it's had with the U.S., and how the South Koreans view the hostilities between the U.S. and North Korea. Jack Murphy explains.
You've also talked about, from an American perspective or even a South Korean perspective, that there's a generation of South Koreans who have no knowledge of a unified Korea, that they never experienced that. And I mean, I remember when I was in South Korea in 2017, tensions were very high with the North at that time. But, you know, you could go out to these hipster coffee shops in Seoul and kids would be there playing the acoustic guitar. They're living their best life. And I was reading in magazines and such that for young people in South Korea, they feel like all this war stuff is really an American issue, not really a South Korean issue. And that's the subject of Korea fatigue, right? And I was wondering if you could speak to that and what our options are in dealing with North Korea realistically.
Yeah, well, so I think, again, this goes back to the fact that we've successfully deterred a resumption of hostilities for 7 decades. And so there is a real sense of complacency. And there's a real, the division of the peninsula is more than just physical. It is mental, intellectual as well. And so, there's stark differences between North and South that we should, that have developed and they are real. And people in the South are very, very proud of the development of South Korea. The Korean Wave, their culture is their identity, and this really showed through in 2018 during the Olympics. The people were most upset when President Moon decided that he would invite the North Korean female hockey team to participate as a combined team. The South Koreans were really upset because there were Korean women who were basically kicked off the team, spent their whole lives preparing for the Olympics to make room for Koreans from the North, to have this symbolic combined team. And they really felt it was an affront to their identity, that we are South Koreans who are, and we shouldn't be forced into this relationship. And so there are these differences. And of course, if you ask Koreans, do they want unification? Many will say in their heart they do, it is that. But the others will say, if you ask, do you want to pay for it? They'll say, hell no. And of course, that's one of the things that drives the fear of the costs of unification. I like to joke that there are probably more PhD dissertations written in South Korea about East and West German unification than any other subject. And they look at those costs and they compare them to the stark differences, the greater differences between North and South than were between East and West Germany. And they're afraid of those costs. But of course, the situation is much different. And so, there is this complacency that has a result of success, but we cannot forget the tyranny of proximity. And that tyranny of proximity is that, there is a 1.2 million man active force on the DMZ. 70% of those 1.2 million men are between the DMZ and Pyongyang. And they train for offensive operations. And so even though they haven't attacked, who can say when? We talk about deterrence and the importance of deterrence, but Sir Lawrence Friedman made this statement: deterrence works until it doesn't. And meaning that, deterrence is in the mind of who we're trying to deter. It's in Kim Jong-un's mind. And we believe we have deterred him for 7 decades, but at some point, when he feels either the conditions are right or he has no other options, he could initiate his campaign plan to unify the Korea by force. And we just don't know when that that could happen. And he is the other point that you're making about how people feel about the North, and don't really know about the war, don't know about the past. A lot of that is based on North Korean infiltration, control of the education units. There's big controversy about textbooks. Who started the Korean War? And in South Korean textbooks, a lot of the American contribution to the defense of Korea has been written out. So you've got younger generations that have been manipulated by left-leaning professors, that are many of them are sympathetic to the North. And of course, people look at the North. Some people, sympathizers, and they look at how North Korea has survived, has remained independent, and they kind of romanticize, the ideology. When it comes down to it, there still is an ideological war between North and South. And South Korea and the U.S. share values of freedom, individual liberty, free market economy, the rule of law, and human rights. Those are values that we share. The North is, of course, the socialist workers' paradise, Juche ideology, Songbun, which is this social classification system that oppresses the North, Songun, which is the military first policy. And of course, it's rule by law and the forced denial of human rights of the Korean people in the North in order to ensure the survival of the Kim family regime. And so you have these two opposing systems, two value structures that exist. And, and it's up for the Korean people to decide which they want to. I've talked to escapees, and this one young woman relates how she believed she was free in North Korea. She was told she was free. She worshiped Kim Jong-un until her family got in trouble and they escaped. And she said, when she finally got to Seoul and observed Koreans in the South, she had no idea what freedom was. She had never experienced it. And it is almost impossible for people like you and I and all of Americans to understand that, because we have been born with freedom. But she didn't, and she worshipped Kim Jong Il and Kim Jong Un, and then and she also said, and this really was disheartening to me, but even though she saw freedom in the South, she was still afraid, and she was afraid that she would see an American soldier, because she was taught that American soldiers occupy South Korea and that they could abuse Korean women at their whim. And so she was deathly afraid of seeing an American soldier. And, it shortly after she learned that American soldiers don't occupy Seoul, and, she was able to overcome that myth. But, to hear that, as somebody so indoctrinated, it is just unimaginable for us.
Dave, was it you or was it someone else who told me a story about a North Korean who was not a defector, really? It was like a fisherman or something. They got swept downstream down into the river and washed across the border into South Korea. And this guy was so indoctrinated by North Korean propaganda, he literally didn't believe his own eyes. He thought that the success and wealth of South Korea was all sort of this like propaganda illusion that he was being, kind of confronted with.
That's that's the mirror imaging that we do on both sides. Of course, North Korea has a village called Gyeongdong. We call it Propaganda Village across the DMZ. It's a hollow shell, but it's supposed to be the perfect Korean village there that we look at, and so that's how they it's a Potemkin village like the Soviets would do. So this 90-pound wasted away communication sergeant during the monsoon floods ended up on the south side of the Imjin River, and the South Koreans showed him all of Seoul, and he didn't believe it. He thought they were just showing him what they wanted to see. They said, "Tell the driver to go where you want." And they put him in a helicopter and flew him around to show. He still didn't believe. He wanted to go home. Now he wanted to go home because of family, because everybody wants to go home, and of course, if he didn't go home, then his family would be sent to the gulags. The unfortunate, sad irony is that because of what he experienced in the South, it is likely that he went to the gulag anyway.
Yeah, you've seen too much.
And that's really, that's what is the really evil nature of the Kim family regime, because outside information is an existential threat to the existence of the regime. Dr. Jung Pak, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific, and she's the Deputy Special Representative for North Korean negotiations.
The former CIA officer.
Former CIA officer, yeah. She always asks when we're at conferences, and she'll ask the audience, who does Kim Jong-un fear more, the U.S. military or the Korean people in the North? And the answer is the Korean people in the North. It is the people that he is most afraid of. And of course, we've seen what happened with COVID, the paradox of COVID inside North Korea. For 2 years, they claimed no outbreak. And then they just had a short outbreak, which they squashed. Although, today there are reports that they're masking again and that, they're still haven't eradicated, even though their propaganda said they did. But during the 2 years of COVID, they worked hard to defend against it. They closed the border with China. But what they really did simultaneously was further oppress the people. They started clamping down on the 400 markets. That's the safety valve for the people that really rose out of the arduous march of the famine of 94 to 96, when the communist food distribution, public distribution system failed. They've cut down on cell phone access, on all outside information, confiscating foreign currency, restricting movement. But the closing of the border with China to both legal trade and the smuggling that takes place has really caused tremendous problems inside North Korea. But because of COVID, Kim Jong-un exploited the opportunity to crack down further, using the justification to prevent COVID. But also he realized that the people the money class, the Dongju class, was growing. People were flourishing in the markets, and that's a threat to him. And of course, there's 6.5 million smartphones inside North Korea. Most of them are only accessed internally in North Korea, but many along the border of China have access to international cell phone towers. And of course, a lot of money is transferred through cell phones back into North Korea from Koreans living outside. So all of this combines to really challenge the regime. And the regime is really, is threatened by this. And so they continue to take action to oppress. Now, what's different about the famine in 94 to 96 and the current situation is that in 1997, Kim Dae-jung was elected, and he instituted the Sunshine Policy, which was based on the theory of giving North Korean carrots in order to change its behavior. And they transferred billions of dollars from 97 to 2007 into North Korea. And of course, what happened? In 2006, North Korea tested its first nuclear weapon. And so the failed Sunshine Policy. But again, the second part of the survival of the famine was the development of the markets. And these have really, they really saved the people inside North Korea. And they have been, for the last 2 decades, how the people have survived. But because of COVID and because of the threat of the growth of these markets, Kim Jong-un has cracked down on them. And so now there will not be any safety valve of a future Sunshine Policy. Sanctions prevent that. You cannot transfer money to North Korea. And the market activity is being quashed. And so the people are suffering and potentially suffering in the next few years at a rate greater than what we saw in 94 to 96. And estimates are that as many as 3 million people perished as a result of the famine, not starved to death, but perished because of the effects of the famine. Obviously some people starved, but others, medical conditions and weakened conditions combined with an almost non-existent medical system and medical care that's available in the North.
And that leads to my next question. I wanted to ask you what we can do to better prepare the North Korean people for reunification and push for reunification within North Korea. So I guess there's 2 parts to that question.
For us, is really 3-part. Is a human rights upfront approach. It is information influence activities, and it is the pursuit of a free and unified Korea. Interestingly, in 1953, the military commanders on both sides wrote into the armistice, paragraph 60, which called on the political leaders to solve the Korea question, which is the unnatural division of the peninsula. And so, but of course, The political leaders never solved it. There were talks a year later in Geneva, which fell through, and the armistice said solve it within 90 days of the signing of the armistice. And so it's been a long 90 days. Last 70 years, so or 60 something years. So we that's really what needs to be done, is solving the Korea question. Now, human rights are really important. In 2014, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry did the most comprehensive assessment of human rights in North Korea. And Justice Kirby from Australia, who led the research, he found, they stated that the human rights abuses and crimes against humanity in North Korea are on a scale that are the worst since World War II. And so the amount of people that are suffering is just really horrendous. And so, and the Korean people in the North don't really understand the human rights that they have. They don't understand, what's in the UN Declaration of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they don't understand, the inalienable rights that we all believe in: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not possible for them. So, but what is really important to understand from an information perspective is when we challenge North Korea on human rights, they are threatened. And even after the Commission of Inquiry came out, they made some subtle changes. They recognized disabled people and passed some laws to give disabled people's rights and things, a real token. But it's an indication that they were influenced and felt threatened, that they had to do something to try to take the pressure off. But counterintuitively, as we focus on the threat from nuclear weapons, we enhance the legitimacy of the regime. So whenever we are focused on nuclear weapons, we need to also focus on human rights, because that undermines the legitimacy of the regime. And of course, the UN Commission of Inquiry said one of the biggest human rights abuses is the forced isolation of the Korean people in the North. The government's lack of allowing information to flow into the North. And we as the international community have a responsibility to get information into the North. And so we need to have a program that is, of course, South Korean government, U.S. government, civil society, and the international community that gets information into the North. Now, what kind of information? They first need to understand the human rights that they are that they are owed, and they really have to understand that. But we also don't need propaganda that just vilifies Kim Jong-un. We see a lot of the escapees from the North, the balloon launches that go in with thumb drives and everything. They tend to insult the regime, and which makes everybody feel good. They mock Kim Jong-un and things like that. But really, what's most effective are things like Korean dramas. Korean dramas have a big influence. The Korean women in the North, despite South Korea still being a very patriarchal society and women, are still discriminated against, as are everywhere. Korean women in the South tend to have a lot of power, and they see women in business. They've had a Korean woman as a president, and so the Koreans in the North see that, and they are influenced by that. And the Korean women, especially in the North, are, because they're the ones who are really the breadwinners. They're the ones who are really running the markets. So they see some kinship there with Korean women in the North and South. But they see in the South that women have much more power than they do in the North. So that's an influence there.
After military service, starting a new career path can be daunting. But so many veterans have found success working in tech, and Sabio can help kickstart your career within a few months. Sabio is a coding bootcamp and developer community that's been training veterans since 2013. And finding a job is built into the program. Sabio could be a game changer for you. Visit sabio.la/military to learn how you can use your VA benefits to enroll. That's sabio.la/military. Check the show notes for the link.
I think maybe it was you that told me, Dave, about how they have smuggled DVDs and CDs from the South into North Korea, mostly of South Korean soap operas. So the North Korean people, through these soap operas, are able to see what life is really like in the South for the first time.
They absolutely do. They know what's going on in the South. There's so much more information. I'm sure many people listening to this have probably watched the Netflix drama, K-drama, comedy drama, Crash Landing on You, which is about a South Korean woman, a very high-level businesswoman who, out for an afternoon of hang gliding, and she ends up crossing into the DMZ and getting rescued by Korean soldiers from the north. And she is protected by those Korean soldiers, and it's a very funny comedy drama, which was panned by the conservatives in the South. But before COVID, I met with a number of North Korean soldiers, including the soldier who escaped across the DMZ in 2017, who was shot, and in the escape when he came across at the Joint Security Area, and he had the tapeworms in his intestines, and but survived. And so I asked them what they thought about this drama, this Crash Landing on You. And I said, what do soldiers who are seeing that on the north side think? He said, it makes them want to come to the South even more than they already do. But what really impressed them was that the drama portrayed not only the Korean people in the North, but Korean soldiers in the North as human beings. They didn't portray them as monsters, as the enemy, but and it showed, North and South getting along. I mean, they ended up having a romantic relationship. It's a drama that, and a comedy drama that, was heartwarming and entertaining, and which is really important, because the best messages really come through entertainment, not leaflets, not the hard propaganda that we think is necessary. These dramas really have an impact. And so, but the fact that South Korea dramas portrayed the North as human beings really resonated with them, because in their experience, they have never, ever seen anything from the North, anything written, anything on radio, anything in video that portrays the South as anything other than people who are stupid and oppressed under the thumb of the United States, and not worthy of living, compared to the Koreans in the North. And so when they see that, they had a real respect for South Korea, because they were treating the Koreans in the North with respect. And of course, again, the conservatives in the South did not like that, because they want to treat, they think that it make the people in the South them. Right. But it's actually a very positive message. I tell this story because Max Brooks was involved in a project we did a few years ago with a number of authors and science fiction writers, futurists, down at US SOCOM. We had a project to look at listen to these authors and how they think about the future, how they visualize the future. And Max Brooks, he was telling me that when he wrote the World War Z, the zombie apocalypse, which everybody's probably seen the movie, but if you read the book, he really did a lot of research at the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute of Health, on how pandemics occur and how you deal with pandemics. And he incorporated many of those techniques into his book. And he made the point that he couldn't write about this stuff in an academic way, that would have any impact. But when he incorporated these techniques in terms of the zombie apocalypse, people were informed about them and introduced to them in their subtle consciousness. And so one of the things that we need to do in the North, and you asked about how do you educate the people about unification, is South Korean entertainment business can develop dramas that show what unification will be like. Such things as land ownership. Koreans in the North don't own their land. And we want them to own their land. Why? Because that will prevent refugee flow. If you are given title to your house and to your farm, you're going to stay where you are, because that's your land. And so that concept of land ownership, but you have to introduce ideas of, how the political system will work. You have to introduce, and one that I really want to emphasize is focused on the military. And we want South Korea to establish policies that if you don't attack the South, you'll have of place in a unified Korea. And it's particularly we want what we call the second tier leaders, the generals who have military power. They're outside the core of the regime, have control of WMD. We want them to know that if they maintain control of their WMD, turn it over to appropriate authorities, don't attack the South, that they'll have a place inside a unified Korea. The other thing is, when we were doing our planning, we did extensive planning for collapse of the regime in the 1990s. I was the co-author of the first con plan for that. And one of the things that we recognized back then was the best functioning institution in North Korea is the military. And we recognized that we really need to keep military intact in North Korea. We don't want it to dissolve. And of course, the Korean military in the North, their philosophy is control and command. We have command and control. Command is leadership, control the science. But in the North, it's all about control and command. And control is the dominant element. And there are actually three chains of control in the military in the North. The traditional chain of command, which we would say from general to private, but they have a political officer chain, like every communist army, to indoctrinate and ensure ideological purity. And they have a security officer chain, to watch the watchers, so you have these three chains of control, but we don't want that to break down, because if they do, you have these trained people who are ideologically predisposed to resist outside influence. We would rather keep them together and have their chain of control function where they can take orders, where we can influence the top leadership to give them the right orders so that they don't dissolve and live to fight another day. And back in the 90s, we were ridiculed for proposing this. The military's bad. You've got to disband it. We got to get rid of them. And this is with some irony. I'm kind of grateful for what happened in 2003 in Iraq when we disbanded the Iraqi army. And that's a concrete example of what happens when you do that. And so we need to keep the North Korean People's Army together so that it can maintain control. When they do studies like Bruce Bennett has done out at RAND, he's looked at collapse and he's looked at securing weapons of mass destruction. It is a huge manpower intensive operation. You've seen all the what does it take to stabilize a country? The 20-1, security to the population and these huge numbers. Well, we don't have the numbers to do that. But if we maintain control of the military, we have people that are capable of doing that. And if those military leaders maintain control of their WMD, we can reduce the number of operations we have to search and seize and secure those weapons. And all of this goes to the point of information. How you set the conditions is, through information to be able to achieve these kind of effects. Now, again, it won't be perfect. There will be true believers who will attack. There will be violence. The collapse of the regime or post-conflict operations, will still be complex and potentially bloody. There's unlikely any resolution of the Korean Peninsula that won't involve some level of conflict. The question is, can we use information? Can we invest in information, which is cheap? It doesn't take a lot of resources to do, but can we invest the intellectual capital to develop the right themes and messages that will resonate, that will have the effects we want to achieve? People say, "Oh, it'll never work." My response to that is, well, yes, if we don't try, it will never work. But I think it's worth trying. And we've seen positive effects. We know from escapees, what influences the people in the North. We know how to do that. We know we have a lot of expertise and key communicators from the North that can demonstrate. I mean, we have political leaders in South Korea who came from the North. Tae Young-ho, Ji Sung-ho. You saw Ji Sung-ho at President Trump's State of the Union holding up the crutches. He is now a national assemblyman in South Korea. He's a political leader, a success from the North. That is one hell of an example for the North Korean people, the people in North Korea, to see what is possible. So those are the kind of things that we have, that kind of information we have to get into North Korea. And of course, what happened in 2020, Kim Yo-jong, who is Kim Jong-un's sister, she's one most evil. In June of 2020, she told South Korea that they have to stop sending information into North Korea. And she threatened and then actually executed that threat to destroy the liaison building in Kaesong, the South Korean liaison building. They blew it up. And a few months later, in December 2020, the South Korean National Assembly passed the anti-leaflet law, making it illegal to send information into North Korea. And so this goes to show how afraid North Korea is of information, and then the lengths that the previous administration and those who have tendencies to sympathize with the North, the lengths that they will go to try to appease the North. And so this is why, I mean, this to me is one of the best illustrations of why we should be focusing on information getting into the North, and focus on human rights and focus on unification. There will be no end to the North Korean nuclear threat and the crimes against humanity until there is a secure, stable, non-nuclear, economically vibrant nation in the North, unified under a liberal constitutional form of government determined by the Korean people. You know, one that is based on freedom, individual liberty, rule of law, free market economics, and human rights for all. That is, and of course, that's a free and unified Korea that might be called a United Republic of Korea, UROK, which you could pronounce as UROK.
Dave, I mean, you really answered all of my questions. You went right through them. So as a final thought, is there anything you'd like to share with, particularly the service members out there who are stationed in South Korea or getting, prepared to deploy to South Korea, and to the American people who, some of them are still wondering, why are we still in South Korea at this time? I think you really covered a lot, but if you could address that, I think our listeners would really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think for the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that deploy to South Korea, you're often out of the limelight. As you said, it's not understood by most of the U.S. population. People, always wonder why, but you make a difference, and it is imperative that we have a well-trained and ready combined force, South Korean and U.S., because that's what deters the attack from the North. As George Washington said, if you want to prevent war, you must prepare for war, and so that is really what we need to do. When I was in Korea in the 1980s, it was one of the best places to train because we patrolled the DMZ. The best place for a squad leader and platoons ever. And I wish that we would go back to patrolling the DMZ. It is my recommendation every chance I get to policymakers, put U.S. forces back on the DMZ, integrated with ROC forces, improve interoperability, demonstrate our resolve to defend South Korea, send that message to North Korea. I would love to have U.S. infantrymen on the DMZ, patrolling the DMZ. But there are training opportunities, and we train forces, to be ready for war, and that's it's hard, but also being in Korea, it is a major developed country now, so it is also a great place to experience and live. And to the American people, I can't emphasize this enough. What happens on the Korean Peninsula will affect everyone in the United States, and it is in our interest to prevent war on the Korean Peninsula. And the best way to prevent war is by having a U.S. presence on the Korean Peninsula. And I would say, in the bigger scheme of things, as we look at an free and open Indo-Pacific, our alliance structure with South Korea, with Japan, with the Philippines, with Thailand, with Australia, it all contributes to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And, that's really part of the big economic engine of the world. And we are connected to that, and we need to maintain that. And our U.S. military presence really ensures that connectivity, demonstrating U.S. strength and resolve to defend first U.S. interests. And because we have allies with shared values and shared interests, that we defend our alliances as well.
There it is. I mean, Dave Maxwell really knows his stuff. It's always really a pleasure to talk to. Sometime we'll have to have him back to discuss America's relationship with the Philippines, which is another flashpoint in the region. I hope all of you really got a lot out of this conversation. As I told Dave before the interview, the subject of North Korea, I feel like it's something that comes up in the media once every 2 or 3 years as the North ratchets up tensions with the South, creates this big crisis scenario, and then the issue just sort of fizzles out until the next time and we do it all over again. And I feel like what gets lost in all the crisis reporting is a lot of the actual, deep historical and political context that Dave very thoughtfully shared with us here today. So I hope that, people really took away a lot of information from this.
Be sure to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter at StripesMMPod. And if you have a tip or story idea, shoot us an email at militarymatters@stripes.com. Don't forget, you can get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes today. Just use promo code PODCAST and get 50% off your digital subscription. That's promo code PODCAST. This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. Thank you for listening. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode.